Hello again. So this little section is on hormones, and in particular we're going to be looking at two pretty big ones, which is insulin and ADH. We also look at what hormones do in plants, because that's mostly how plants respond to different stimuli in their environment. Now, it's also just important here to remind you that we looked at the nervous system, and we said the nervous system response was usually fast, whereas the hormonal system was quite slow. And in the nervous system, there was a stimulus which produces a response, whereas the hormonal system is different. It has glands which produce hormones. They travel in the blood and they go to target organs. So this is the bit that we're going to look at most. What glands are, how they travel, how they release their hormones, how they travel around the body, and then what they do when they get to their target organs. So getting into it then, the hormonal system is sometimes known as the endocrine system. It is basically a second communication system in our body. And in this case, hormones will act as chemical messengers. They're proteins and they're produced by glands that release them directly into the blood, and it then travels to the target organ. Okay, so just to summarize that bit, a hormone is a protein. It's also a chemical messenger. They're released from glands into the blood, and then they travel to target organs. When they get to the target organ, they produce a specific response. Many hormones have only one target organ, but some may have several. Now, if we look at one which we're all familiar with, a hormone might be adrenaline. It is produced by the adrenal gland. It travels in your blood to the target organs. Now, the target organs for adrenaline are your heart and your brain. Now, we said that they would produce a specific response in their target organ. In the heart, they make the heart beat faster, and in the brain, they increase the speed of your reflexes, so you can react to things quicker. Now, getting back to this part, we said that hormones usually act more slowly than the nervous system and over a longer period. For example, estrogen in females and testosterone in males brings about changes over many years. Now, hormones have an important role in maintaining the internal environment of the body in a relatively constant state in response to changes inside or outside the body. So basically, the point of hormones is to try and keep the inside of your body in as constant a state as possible. It ensures proper functioning of cells and enzymes in response to an internal or external change. The maintenance of this constant state is referred to as homeostasis. Two examples of a homeostatic role of hormones are controlling the concentration of glucose in the blood by insulin and controlling the water content of the blood, as referred to as osmoregulation. Now, the hormone that does that is ADH, which is released from the pituitary gland in the brain, but its target organ is the kidney. Now, this is just some fairly common questions you'll get. What is a hormone? It is a chemical messenger. which is released from glands into blood. And as well as that, they are proteins. Where are hormones produced? They're produced in glands. They travel in the blood around the body. And the target organ then is where the hormone goes to, where the hormone travels to and has its effect. And what is homeostasis then? It is the maintenance of internal conditions. This diagram then just shows some of the main glands in the body. We have got the pituitary gland, we've got the thyroid gland in your neck, we've got the pancreas, which produces insulin and glucagon and that controls blood sugar levels. We've got the adrenal glands above the kidneys, which produces adrenaline, and it's known as the fight or flight hormone. If you're a female, you've got ovaries, but if you're male, you've got testes, which produce estrogen and progesterone in the ovaries and testosterone in the testes. So, one of the main hormones we're looking at is insulin, and it controls your blood glucose levels. So insulin is a hormone that prevents the concentration of glucose in the blood becoming too high. Glucose is constantly needed by all cells for respiration and therefore must always be present at a sufficient concentration. But if there is too much glucose in the blood, it can damage the body cells due to water loss by osmosis. Insulin is produced and released into the blood by special cells in the pancreas in response to increasing or high blood glucose concentration. It usually occurs after a meal, especially if the meal is rich in carbohydrates. Now, that bit's important. Let's say, for example, we eat starch. It gets digested into glucose and then absorbed into the blood. So your blood glucose levels increase. Now, let's just summarize that then. So insulin is produced in the pancreas. It travels in the blood and its target organ is mostly the liver, but it's also the body's cells. Okay, and its main job is to control blood glucose levels. Now, as we're saying here, the main target organ for the insulin is the liver, where it causes, now it's really important that you know these three things. Increased absorption of blood glucose. It converts glucose into glycogen, where it's stored in the liver. And also, there's more respiration that takes place. Now, this is probably a good place to remind you that the equation for respiration is glucose plus oxygen, which produces carbon dioxide, plus water. So, if there's more glucose available, more respiration can take place. So to summarize the key points for the liver, which we'll do up here in our little summary, the liver increases absorption of glucose. It stores glycogen and it increases respiration. Now, one wee thing we haven't talked about here in much detail is this transfer of glucose into glycogen. Now, at the start here, this is glucose, which is soluble, which means it can be easily transported in the blood. Insulin will act on it, and it will join up all the little glucose molecules together to form insoluble glycogen, which is good for storage in the liver cells. So these three ways are ways in which insulin decreases the amount of glucose in the blood. So this little diagram just summarizes it. So if we say that this is the start, you're sitting with a normal blood glucose concentration. But then it's dinner time and you eat a meal rich in carbohydrates, e.g. pasta. Now, what we know about pasta is that it contains a lot of starch, and this can get digested to glucose. So as a result, your blood glucose concentration increases. Now, that can't be allowed to go on for too long because that's dangerous. That can actually harm your body cells. So your pancreas detects that. The pancreas detects the increase in blood glucose and produces insulin. The insulin then has this effect. It causes a decrease in blood glucose concentration because the liver absorbs it. It converts some of it to glycogen and it respires it. So that's three ways the liver can reduce it. It absorbs it, converts it to glycogen, and respires it, which brings our blood glucose levels back to normal. Now, the final little part then, when blood glucose is low, less insulin is produced. This means that the above processes don't take place, or they take place at a slower rate, helping to raise the concentration of glucose in the blood. Now, this is a typical question where you would have to look at the graph and explain what happens to blood glucose levels after eating a meal. So, if you look here, at time 0, this is where the meal's taken. You can see there's a delay of 15 minutes, but then the blood glucose levels start to rise. We get to this time here, and blood glucose levels start to fall again. Now you'll notice here that they don't just go back to normal straight away. They're close to normal, and then later on they're at normal levels. Now, if you're answering a question like this, you have to describe what you see, which is what I've just done there, but then you have to explain it. So, what does the insulin do? What does the liver do? When using a graph, you need to make sure you always use data. So here's what happens. At the start, now this is us using data, there is 70 milligrams per 100 centimeter cubed of blood. Then it rises to 150 milligram per 100 centimeter cubed. Now that's because the carbohydrates get digested and absorbed into the blood. So that's explaining that data. The glucose levels are highest at 36 minutes. That's more data. Then the pancreas releases insulin and the blood glucose levels return to normal 66 minutes after eating because the liver absorbs it, the cells respire it, and the glucose is converted to glycogen. Now I want you to try this little question here. So, what happens to your blood glucose levels after you eat pasta? Now you can do this in bullet points, but this is a typical 6-mark question where you've got to try and explain what happens. So pause it here, give yourselves 5 minutes, try and answer this question. So starch gets broken down into glucose by amylase. That's digestion. The glucose gets absorbed in the bloodstream, in the ileum, which was the small intestine. The blood glucose levels rise. The pancreas detects the rise in glucose levels and produces insulin. In the liver, the glucose is absorbed by the cells, converted to glycogen and respired. And finally then, blood glucose levels fall and return to normal. Now the next little part about the hormone insulin is negative feedback. So negative feedback is a mechanism to ensure that the concentration or level of something does not deviate too far from the normal value. It usually involves at least one hormone. Now, such mechanisms include feedback because the body constantly monitors the concentration or level of what it controls. Now, that bit is a pretty important line. The body constantly monitors the concentration or level of what it controls. So in this case, the pancreas constantly monitors blood glucose levels. In the case of blood glucose concentration, the pancreas fulfills this role, responding by adjusting the amount of insulin it releases into the blood. The mechanism is negative feedback because increasing the hormone has the opposite or negative effect on what is being monitored. So this is what it comes down to. Increasing the amount of insulin causes the blood glucose concentration to fall back towards normal. So looking at this diagram then, if we start off here with normal blood glucose concentration, if our blood glucose levels rise because we've eaten a meal rich in carbohydrates, insulin causes the glucose to change to glycogen and it increases respiration and increases absorption. So the glucose levels fall, blood glucose levels fall, and we go back to normal. Okay, now that was negative feedback because whenever insulin production is increased, it decreases the concentration of blood glucose. Now, there is another example of that. This time, blood glucose levels can actually decrease. Now, that will happen during exercise. This time, a different hormone, glucagon, causes the glycogen to change to glucose. So, glucagon causes the glycogen to change to glucose. So, in this case, that long molecule gets broken up into little bits of glucose. So the blood glucose increases and we return to normal. This is a typical question based on negative feedback then. So describe negative feedback in relation to the control of blood glucose levels. So we said negative feedback involves constant monitoring. So the pancreas constantly monitors it. When the blood glucose level increases, insulin is released from the pancreas. And then insulin makes the liver cells change the glucose to glycogen and respire more. So the blood glucose levels return to normal.